Okay. Okay. What are you seeing right now?
Your sort of slide overview, so 21
okay,
slides.
Good. That's what I was hoping. How's that?
That looks like the presentation.
Rock and roll.
Okay, let me just give it another minute for
yeah, totally, no hurry.
to sort of come back from the break.
So I have 15 minutes, right?
Yeah, we're not too precious about the 15 minutes, but you know.
All right. Is there any? Should I be leaving time for questions? Is there a way to ask questions?
No, we can take the questions afterwards.
Okay.
So you're the end of this sort of day's session.
Okay. Great.
So yeah, we've got a few extra people joining now. So.
Okay. So after I've done my talk, I will stay on the line, and you can moderate questions, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Right. Am I on video as well, as in people can see my face?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay.
Just the way that we've set it up, that people won't be able to unmute themselves. So if you do want to ask questions, then there's a raise a hand function, or put a thumbs up, or something of that nature.
Got it. So what is the connection of this conference to Rwanda?
Originally, the conference was scheduled to be in Rwanda, just as a place of scientific excellence, you know, sort of within that region, and so that was the primary sort of staging post for the conference originally.
So are there plenty of attendees from Africa?
Yes, throughout obviously we're into a different time zone now, but throughout yesterday we had 20 plus people from across the continent.
Great.
North, south, east, and west. I noticed some people are struggling to still connect at the moment. Foundation, and also the VP of New Technology Division of Ajax Therapeutics. We're delighted to have you join us, Aubrey. Please proceed with your presentation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Edward, and I'm delighted to be giving this talk. I'm very glad that the conference was able to proceed online, even though, of course, the pandemic has prevented it from happening physically. And I have only ever been to one country in Africa, namely South Africa. So I'm also very interested by the fact that a lot of the planning and organization has been done by people from Africa. So I'm just going to, of course, in these 15 minutes, give a very brief overview of the work that I do and that we do at Sense Research Foundation, and where it's going and why you should be excited by it. Before I move on, I just wanted to mention, given the connection of this conference to Africa, that a lot of people often think that aging is kind of not an African problem, because there's still such a high incidence of death early in life from infectious diseases especially. But that has been going down so rapidly over the past decade or more that now it's no longer really true. There's not a single country, even in sub-Saharan Africa, that has a life expectancy less than 50. So aging is very much a problem that affects all nations now. And of course, right now, in the midst of this pandemic, we are particularly aware of this because of the extraordinarily high susceptibility of the elderly to getting seriously sick and indeed dying from this coronavirus. Okay, so, well, this seems like a very ambitious title, the idea that we may bring aging completely under medical control so that one's chronological age, how old you are, how long ago you were born, is no longer a guide to how healthy you are, which is, of course, how much you have aged. But I really think that is within striking distance of happening. And the reason I think that is because I think we are close to developing an answer to this question here. Of course, in the industrialized world, death from infectious diseases, until late in life anyway, is almost a thing of the past. There is very little death early in life. So the question is, how have we been so unsuccessful in doing the same thing for the health problems of late life? And I believe that mainly the reason why people don't think about that question is because they think they already know the answer. Namely, that it's just, there's a lot of things that go wrong all at the same time, and it's just the complexity is overwhelming. But that is not really the main answer. In order to introduce the main answer, I need to define what aging is. I need to give you a definition of aging that helps you, first of all, to understand that aging is not a mystery. Aging is simply the combination of these two processes that I'm showing you on this slide. First of all, a process that goes on throughout life, whereby our metabolism, in other words, the entire network of processes that keep us alive from one day to the next, generates damage in the body, changes to the molecular and cellular structure of the body, which the body is set up to tolerate up to a point, but eventually not. Eventually, the damage becomes more than what we are set up to tolerate, and that's when the other process kicks in, the one on the right, in late life, where this damage generates the pathologies that we see, the chronic progressive conditions that eventually kill us. And I believe that a large part of why we have failed to bring aging under comprehensive medical control already is because most people don't really think of aging in the way that I've just described. Most people think of it in the way that I'm showing you on this little table here. They think that aging is completely different from diseases. And they recognize, most people recognize that there are different types of disease. So here I have divided them into three broad categories: infections in column 1, and then genetic diseases in column 2, the ones that a few people inherit, and then the chronic progressive conditions of late life, which I just spoke about, which is what is the big one in the industrialized world, and as I mentioned, increasingly in the developing world. But the thing is that most people think of aging as this completely different thing, way out in the stratosphere, that has really no relation to diseases, and therefore that somehow is off limits to medicine. And this is completely wrong. The corrected version of this table is what I'm showing you now, where if you look closely, you'll see that the columns are all the same as before, but what I've done is I've moved that big, thick black line. This is to emphasize two things. First of all, we want to emphasize the fact that the things in column 3, the so-called diseases of aging, are nothing like infections. And therefore, it's no surprise that we have failed to overcome the chronic conditions of late life by using the same methods, the same types of medicine that have worked so well for the things in column 1. The other thing that the correct positioning of this big black line communicates is that there is essentially no difference, no meaningful difference between column 3 and column 4. Column 3 consists of the aspects of aging that we have given disease-like names to, but that's really the only difference. All of the things in column 3 and column 4 are aspects of the pathologies of late life. the things on the right-hand end of that three-word, two-arrow diagram that I showed a minute ago. And this is a very important thing to recognize, because it helps us to see how we might develop ways to do something about aging. This is what we do at the moment. We effectively treat column 3 as if it were like column 1, and we ignore column 4 completely. That's what geriatric medicine is, trying to cure the diseases of aging, which can't be done because they are, as you can see here, side effects of being alive in the first place. Now, I'm not the first person to realize this. And indeed, for more than a century, people have been saying, well, we've got to be more preventative. We've got to somehow clean up our metabolism, make our metabolism run more cleanly and generate damage more slowly, so that it will take longer to rise to a level that causes us to get sick. Great idea, but unfortunately that also has completely failed to actually keep people healthy late in life. And this is why, again, it comes down to complexity. In this case, this really is the whole answer. Metabolism is just insanely complicated. What I'm showing you here is a gross oversimplification of how complicated it is. And so there's no real way that we're going to be able to tweak this thing, this network, to stop it from doing the things that we don't want it to do, creating damage, without having unintended consequences that stop it from doing the things we need it to do to keep us alive. Luckily, though, avoids the problems I've explained that the geriatrics approach has. I call it the maintenance approach. You can call it the damage repair approach. And as you can see at the top, I'm calling this the common sense approach. Because the fact is, it really is pretty obvious when you have realized it. All we're doing here is we are letting damage come into existence, be generated by metabolism, but then before it gets to the level that makes us sick, before the right-hand process kicks in, we repair some of the damage. So we keep the overall level of damage below the point that causes us to get sick. And this is much simpler. And furthermore, it's what we already do. If you think about my definition of aging, you could have used the same definition, the exact same definition, to describe the aging of a car or an airplane or any other simple man-made machine. It's simply that a man-made machine is, it has a way that it normally operates, and it does itself damage starting from the first time it was built. And that damage accumulates. And for a while, the damage is harmless. So rust accumulates in a car, for example. And that's fine for a while. If you let the rust accumulate too much, the doors fall off. But if you don't, then the car can carry on working for as long as you like. This car has benefited from an unusually comprehensive amount of preventative maintenance throughout its existence, and it's working just as well as it did when it was built more than 100 years ago. So what does this mean for the human body? Well, it turns out that even though the human body is much more complicated than simple man-made machines, it's not unmanageably complicated. In particular, even though the metabolism in the body, the way that the body works, is insanely complicated, and the pathologies of aging that eventually kill us are also really, really many and varied and complicated. Nevertheless, the thing in the middle, this thing called damage, is actually not so complicated. It turns out that all of the molecular and cellular changes that qualify as damage by this definition can be classified into this very manageable number of categories, just 7 categories. And I've been using this same classification for nearly 20 years now, and nobody has found anything that doesn't fit into it. So it seems very likely to be true, that classification on the left-hand side of this chart. But of course, the really good news is what's on the right-hand side, the fact that for every category, we have a generic therapy that can, in principle, be used to actually stop this damage from accumulating too much by repairing it, by eliminating it from the body. If we look at the top one, loss of cells, that's simply cells dying and not being automatically replaced by cell division. We can repair that damage by putting new cells in ourselves. And of course, the way we do that is with stem cells. Now, I created a foundation to work on all of this, and was able to get a bit of money to from wealthy donors and from other people. We have many donors now, tens of thousands, I think, total. But with the small amount of money we have, only about $5 million a year, we can't do nearly as much as we would like. However, what we have done is quite impressive. I'm showing you here just 4 of really groundbreaking publications from the literature of the past several years. In each of these cases, we cracked open a whole area of research that had really, people had given up on. They just thought it was too hard. So we're very proud of this. And now this whole paradigm has become extremely mainstream and orthodox. So what I'm showing you here is a couple of figures from a paper that came out only 7 years ago. And this paper basically reinvented what I had said more than 10 years earlier, but this time everybody agreed with it. And it was no longer a big paradigm shift that people had trouble understanding. In their case, they split aging into 9 categories instead of 7, but that's not because they thought of things that I'd overlooked. It was just that they did a different kind of classification. But you can see it's exactly the same idea, types of damage on the left and types of repair strategy on the right. So a big thing I want to bring to your attention before I finish is that a lot of people say that, well, quality of life matters much more than longevity. And of course, quality of life matters a great deal. But the fact is, there is no reason to have to ask ourselves whether health matters more than longevity or less, because they go together. Today, people are hung up on this idea that these things are in some way alternatives, because at this point, when we don't have medicines that can keep people healthy, there are lots of trade-offs to be made. A lot of the things that we like doing are bad for us and have a bad effect on our longevity. But for these medicines, that's not the situation at all. Here, the way that we will get longevity is only by getting health first. So we really need to be remembering that this is not about longevity for longevity's sake. And so when people say, oh dear, where will we put all the people? Or, won't it be boring? Or how will we pay the pensions? Or doesn't death give meaning to life? Or any of that kind of nonsense. You've got to remember that those problems, even if they did exist, which in fact they won't, even if they did, they would have to be worse than the problem we have today of people getting sick when they get old. Everybody getting sick when they get old, even wealthy people. And that's a really big problem. More than 2/3 of all deaths worldwide are caused by the accumulation of damage in the body. They're caused by the late life pathologies that I've been talking about. I just wanted to mention before I close that this is no longer simply a charitable enterprise. Science Research Foundation is a charity, but we have definitely been able to create an industry. This is a list of some of the companies that we have spun out, the projects we spun out into startups that have moved forward with much increased funding as a result. And there are huge numbers of other companies now that exist in this space, so many that I can't keep up. I actually mentioned a website at the bottom of this slide, which is a great resource for those of you who want a comprehensive account of the companies that exist in this space. But this is my last slide. I just want to say this is coming fast. The actual technologies that will help people to stay healthy may take up to 15 or 20 years from now. In fact, it's possible they'll take 100 years, I don't know. But they will bring aging pretty much entirely under medical control. Initially, they will only give us a few decades of extra life, but because that life will be healthy, that will take us to what I've called longevity escape velocity. And the thing is, everybody's going to understand this very soon, within the next few years. So I'll just stop there and mention that I wrote this book several years ago, which covers the science of sense in a great deal of detail, far more than I've had a chance to talk about today. And if there's any time, I'd be happy to answer questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor de Grey. Very succinct, as I would expect from yourself. Gennady, unmute. Sorry, there we go.
Yes, thank you very much. As always, I appreciate your presentation. Now, my question is threefold, and it follows up from some general comments you made during a recent interview with my friend Steele Archer on the Detonation show, which is a great interview to watch, by the way. But my curiosity stems from the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the field of rejuvenation biology. And the three parts of my question are, what has been the effect on the work of the SENS Research Foundation? Second, what has been the effect on the activities of the field in general, particularly with regard to any experiments that might have been affected by physical distancing requirements? And third, what has been the effect on your time frame of the 50% probability in 17 years? Has that been shifted at all as a consequence of COVID-19?
Right. Well, great question. Great three-part question, Gennady, as I would have expected from you. So let me deal with the second part first. Certainly our research has been slowed down, and I'm quite sure that everybody's has been slowed down. You've got to actually be there to do biology experiments. And we have only been able to have a couple of people in our lab at any one time. So really the work has been going at most 1/3 as fast as it previously was, which is, you know, a real pain. And of course, we very much hope that the lockdown will be at least slightly relaxed fairly soon so that we can start speeding up again. With regard to our priorities, and indeed the priorities of the rest of the field within rejuvenation biotech, well, we already had the rejuvenation of the immune system as a big priority. So it doesn't really change our priorities, but we certainly very much hope that this will wake up the rest of the community, especially people who can write checks, whether they be in industry or from government or wherever, who will be able to see how important it is to hasten research to restore the function of the immune system in the elderly to something like youthful levels, whether that be by regrowing the thymus or rejuvenating lymph nodes or eliminating senescent immune cells. All of these things need to be done. Over the past few years, there's been great progress in all of those areas, and that progress needs to be accelerated. And I hope very much that one silver lining of the pandemic will be that that will happen. In general, I hope that the pandemic will leave people, especially decision makers around the world, in a position of having a bit more rationality when it comes to health, understanding what our priorities really are and really need to be, and how economically devastating the neglect of the health of vulnerable populations is. And of course, by far the largest vulnerable population within the human race is those who are suffering from the health problems of late life.
Thank you. And what do you think lay people can do right now, other than, of course, donate as they have done in the past and to a greater extent, but in terms of cultivating that awareness of the link between aging and susceptibility to infectious diseases and pandemics?
Yeah, I think my advice there is very much the same as it's always been. It's just that maybe that advice will actually have more effect now. Not that people will listen to me more, but people will listen to each other more. I've always said that advocacy is the one thing that everybody can do. You can all talk to your friends and your family and your colleagues and get them to understand that aging is a really important thing. Now, in the context of the pandemic, perhaps it's going to be easier to get people to actually listen to that message than it used to be.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just looking to see if there are any other hands being raised by our participants. with regard to any questions that you'd like to put towards Professor de Grey?
Let me just say while we're waiting that the email address and website on my screen right now is always available. We have, I mean, my email address is public. It's the only one I have. I actually see everything that comes to it. Furthermore, there is a contact form at our website that you can ask any question you like at, and I see those messages too. In addition, of course, our website has a huge amount of information written for every kind of audience, all the way from complete novices up to absolute experts in the biology of aging, and plenty of news about what's going on at SANS, what's going on elsewhere, where in the world I'm speaking, even if it's virtual. You know, all of that information is there. So I very much recommend that you spend time at trans.org.
Thank you very much. Well, I don't see any more hands raised, but certainly I'm sure that as the we do have one. Sorry, I'll unmute you, Christy.
Yes. Hello, Aubrey. I have a question. When it comes to Africa, to what extent do you think it is possible to skip certain steps in the healthcare system and maybe go straight to a different paradigm of aging?
Well, actually, in the context of Africa, I'm fairly optimistic. And the reason I'm optimistic is perhaps a little bit counterintuitive. What I look at is the history of what's happened with HIV in Africa. Because, of course, what we've seen there is that initially, when antiretroviral drugs that really worked started to be developed and started to be available in the West, they were far too expensive and very, very poorly available within sub-Saharan Africa generally. And eventually that changed. Eventually, you know, whether through political pressure or whatever, it became possible for countries in sub-Saharan Africa to access antiretrovirals to a relatively affordable price. And of course, the result, certainly in South Africa and to some extent elsewhere, has been very significant already. And of course, we hope very much that it will continue. So the reason I regard this as a feel-good story is not obvious. It's simply because when something has happened once, it happens the second time a great deal more rapidly than it happened the first time. So I believe that as and when therapies that really work against aging start to become available in the West, the advocacy and the efforts to ensure that those therapies are made available to everyone old enough to need them in poorer parts of the world will be, that message will be heard and be acted upon far more rapidly the second time round as a result of the very poor, slow response that happened in the case of HIV. Of course, we would hope that the same kind of thing will happen in relation to infectious diseases such as coronavirus. With any luck, the infrastructure and trained medical personnel and so on that are required to have the appropriate level of preparedness for the next pandemic to make sure that it never becomes a pandemic, that will happen as well. But I think in the case of aging, the same kind of thing applies. Maybe I'm being a bit hopeful there, but I really think that's very possible.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you.
I'll mute myself. Thank you very much. Well, I take it that there aren't any other questions, unless anybody wishes to follow up with that valid question from Christy. Just quickly. No. Okay. Well, thank you very much once again, Aubrey, for joining us.
My pleasure.
And I think conferences such as this will be probably more prevalent even after we emerge from these lockdowns.
I think you're right. I think you're right.
I don't like to use the word quarantine because that would infer that we're all infected. But yes, once these various measures from the authorities are lifted, but hopefully this will enable us to connect on a more human level, if not in the flesh, but certainly face to face.
And congratulations on putting together such a successful conference.
Thank you very much. And obviously, there's a lot of people that have put a lot of time and effort into this, so all credit to them. And obviously, it wouldn't be anything without the speakers and the participation from everyone else. So, thank you very much. Right. The next session, I'll just pull up the timings for the next. Next session will be 6 a.m. in Los Angeles, 9 a.m. in New York, 2 p.m. this afternoon in London. And as you can see, the other dates and times are there. It won't be the same link as what you've joined this one. You should have all received a series of 3 links with the appropriate calendar invites as well, to give you the idea of the timings. So once again, thank you so much for joining us today or this evening, and it's morning and afternoon in various places already. So I wish you a few hours break, and we'll meet again in another few hours. Thanks very much, everybody.